I'm C.R. Fulton, and I'm here to talk to you today about creative writing. It's one of my very favorite things to do, and I believe that it can be something that's great for every single person, whether they want to have a career in writing, or whether they just want to express their thoughts and feelings, or whether they need to really figure out what their thoughts and feelings are. So with that being said, let's dive in to some skills of creative writing. I'm kind of an accidental writer. I never intended to be a writer. I never dreamed of being a writer. I was an avid reader is what I was. I absolutely loved to read books. And my parents had trouble keeping enough books on the shelf for me. And one day I just decided when I was probably about 18 or 19 years old that I was never going to find the story that I really always wanted to read. So I better write it. And that became my first novel, Swift Main. It took me a couple of years to complete, and it does have a sequel called Ironhold. And as I began to write those, I began to discover how much I loved writing. So maybe you're at a point right now where writing is kind of a drudgery. It's something that you have to do. It's something that you really have to work at. It's worth it because it makes you able to express your thoughts and able to even communicate with people better. So persevere, because creative writing is worth it. It's a skill that is engaging. It's a skill that grows you as a person. So keep on the road. So whether you're writing essays, short stories, full-length fiction, novellas, screenplays, whatever it is that you are writing right now, whatever project that you're working on, there's one important element that has to happen in every piece of writing, whether it's poetry to screenplays and everything in between. And that one item is this: something happens. That's what makes a story. Telling a story about a mundane day will never get anybody interested. So if you want to capture your reader, if you want to draw people in, the number one most important thing that has to happen in your writing is that something happens. A lot of people call that their plot. I call that my opening, okay? So when you begin to sit down and write, it's so easy to want to explain everything that's happening. Well, what's the setting and where are the people and who are they? And I'm just gonna explain my characters and explain their day and their mood. That never works, because as Americans, at least, we are so driven to get things done, so driven to have things done quickly, that no one will continue reading that kind of opening. Here's a scary statistic. Did you know as a writer, you only have 250 words to capture your reader? If you don't have their complete and total interest in 250 words, they're not going to keep reading, which would be a real shame because your story is worth telling. So the first 250 words are by far the most important words that you'll ever write in your story. Now, don't let that bog you down. Don't let that make you afraid. Let it drive you to put your best elements inside of those first 250 words. A great opening happens with action. Something happens in the very first paragraph, in the very first line. Pretend like it's a car that you're putting a reader in. Do they have to dig in the console for the keys and find those keys and then try to start the engine, put it in? Man, it's just so much to do. I just want to get out of this car. But if you provide them with the car that the engine's warmed up, the seat heat is on, the windshield is clear, all they have to do is put that car in drive and take off, you have a reader who is going to stay with you. Whether it's a short story or an essay, you have even fewer words. So the longer your book, if you're writing a novel, you've got those 250 words. If you're writing an essay, you've got a sentence. So that first sentence has to really have a good hook, and it has to draw your reader in. Here's a few things that you don't ever want your characters doing on your first page. You don't want them to be on a phone call. No phone calls. It's just so overdone. There are very few people who will continue reading if you have a character on the phone. Another thing, don't have them dreaming. I don't know why it's so tempting to have your character dreaming, but the fact of the matter is your character is laying flat on their back. Even if it's an incredibly exciting dream, your character's sleeping and nothing is really happening to them. So make sure that your character is awake on your first page. Another thing that characters should not be doing is telling. Okay, you've probably heard this drilled into you over and over from here, there, and everywhere. You need to show and not tell. That's a really tough one for some people to just grab a hold of. I can either tell you she sat down in a restaurant in Maine. It was a town called Barberville. I told you that. And it's not really that interesting. But if I tell you, I always write in the first person, and we'll get to that later. So if I told you I sat down on the cold bench seat of a diner and I looked at the paper, the Barberville Times, Maryland, then I have at least shown you a little bit through action where the character is. I didn't tell you that, I showed it to you, which is a really important skill, and that's something that you can grow in. It's something that you get better at doing. It's not something that comes naturally to most writers. There are 3 parts to every single story, okay? You want to count them with me? Disaster, disaster, and an ending. Or you could also put it this way: a disaster, a disaster, a disaster, and an ending. That's the way most really great fiction is written. There are 3 disasters and an ending. A very wise man named Dean Koontz, an excellent writer, once said, plunge your character into terrible trouble immediately, and then have their desire and actions and everything they're doing in that, in that troubled state to get out of it, have those actions drive them further into trouble until you reach a point where you're just sure that your character cannot make it through this next scene. Okay, so that's your second disaster. First disaster, plunge them into terrible trouble. Second disaster, everything they've done to try to get out of trouble has actually made the trouble worse. Okay, so that's disaster number 2. That should be around midpoint in your story. You should be having another major issue. So maybe you write romance and it's not a bomb going off. It's not something that you're like, I don't have like trouble in my book. If you write romance, the trouble is the relationship isn't going well. There's conflict. Somebody said something they shouldn't have said. That is your conflict. So conflict doesn't always have to be major explosions and gunshots and that kind of thing. It can be according to your genre, but there must be conflict and there must be action going on in your book. So keep in mind 3 parts to every story: disaster, disaster, ending. Every good story makes you feel something. That's what we love about fiction, is that we get so involved and we have so much empathy toward a character. And empathy is where you feel what the character is feeling. You have that connection with them. So something important to do on your first page and throughout your whole story is to make sure that you're building empathy. Try and think of things that almost everybody you know can relate to. Try and think of scenes and lines and dialogue that almost everybody can relate to, that they could say, oh man, I've had that happen, or they connect with it in some way. Okay, that's a really important skill to start to watch throughout your life. It doesn't just happen immediately, but as you go through life, as you have conversations, as you experience situations, that you can pay attention to things, even when you're talking to your friends and telling them a story about something that happened to you, and you realize they're like, oh yeah, I've been there. That's a part that should go in your book. Make that a scene somewhere. Fit it inside of your story, inside of your character, because that's something that people connect with. And that's what's going to keep readers going with your writing. When they have such a huge choice, they have a plethora of other things they could be reading. That's what's going to make them stick with you and your story, is that they connect with the character. So think of ways that you can connect with your readers through your character's journey. So how do you develop a character? First of all, I always have at least one sheet, probably 2 or 3 different sheets for each character. A sheet of paper. I'm a notebook girl. I do not sit down and type on the computer well. That is not how I flow. Maybe it is for you. So however it is that you write, wherever your creative flow is, in that. For me, it's notebooks, so that's what I'm going to be using here. But I sit down and I write the character's full name at the top. I don't care if I never use their middle name in the book. I need to know it. I'm the author. I need to know that about them. Their height, their eye color, hair color, of course, all of those physical features. And then we have to dive even deeper into who your character is. What's their favorite drink? What are their pet peeves? Going to have their flaws? What are their traits that they really need to work on? What are the things in life that they really struggle with? Who is the most important person to them, to that character that you're writing? What kind of pets do they have, if any? What kind of house do they live in? What kind of car do they drive? Write down all the facts that you can, because the more facts that you have about your character, the more you are going to know the character. And that gives you, as the author, ability to make a real, believable character, which is just an incredibly beautiful thing. So as you go and write characters, don't forget to pull from real life. I have many times met someone or seen someone at a gas station or just had some kind of experience with someone and thought they are so going to be a character in a book someday. I have one in specific that I'm thinking of. It was a fellow who was just big and tall, and his lower lip kind of always hung out, like he just never pulled it in. And he spoke really slowly, and not to say that I'm not being rude in any way. He just was very paced in the way he spoke and very methodical, and he just didn't change anything. Like whatever he set out to do or whatever he said, like that was it. And he is a character in one of my books, and he's actually very funny. So pull from real life, because real people make really good characters. Of course, you don't want to go off and offend somebody or actually write a real person into your books unless you're writing memoir. And even then, most of the time, depending on your memoir, you need to be kind of careful with that because it can be a little touchy. Something else we need to talk about right away is point of view. So point of view is who is telling your story. Like if you thought about a movie, a video, where's the camera in the video? Is it right inside? Are you like looking out of the person's eyes? That would be first person. That's the way I write. I love writing in first person. Third person and second person, it just doesn't come out. I just like, it doesn't work. I write in first person. So if you have a natural ability in one point of view, go with it, stick with it, use it, and develop it. Some problems with first person. Each one kind of does have a weakness. And the weakness with writing first person is you can only tell the story from your character's point of view. So whatever she knows or he knows about your story is all you can tell your reader. And that forces you to get really creative, especially when you're writing mystery or writing action, forces you to get really creative with how you can tell your story. How can I get this information to my reader through my character? The beauty of first person is that it is so personal. You are right there inside of it's I went to the store. It's I stood up and said. That's the way the book reads, and it makes it this incredibly personal experience. Third person is the other main point of view, and that's he said, she said, they went to. That's how third person reads, and that's very popular. And you have this ability to kind of jump away from what's going on right here and tell the reader, oh, but over here, 600 miles away, something else was happening, which is something you cannot ever do in first person. So it does have some strengths like that. The hard thing about writing third person is that you have to be really careful to keep your tenses correct. You can't really zoom in one character and be really deep inside their head and their thoughts and then pull back and then go into somebody else. You have to kind of have some talent to mix in your ability to tell what all your characters are thinking and yet not be zooming in and out so much that your reader's like, I'm just so confused as to who's talking, what's going on. I wish we had just stayed with that character. So you have to have a little bit more self-control, if you want to call it that, when you're writing third person. I'm not even going to talk about second person because I don't really have any experience with it. Maybe you do. Another important thing to do when writing or when creating a story is to write down every scene, every little bit of dialogue, every funny thing, every interesting thing, write it down, because sometimes something comes to me that's really good and it is a super inconvenient time to write that thing down. I just got in bed, I'm comfortable, I'm in the shower, I'm driving my car, writing and scenes come to me all the time. So I have to be really dedicated to force myself to roll back out of bed and write that line down, because I always think, that is so good, I will not forget it. Yes, you will. Write it down. Don't waste any time. And the more that you can build up this repertoire of little scenes, even if it's just a one-liner, when you're writing your book, it's so wonderful to have that resource. If you're like, boy, I'm just not sure what should go here. It's so wonderful to go flip back through, or, scroll back through and say, oh, look at this little scene. That would go really right here, really perfect, and would just add a little bit of a pop right there. It'd be fun. So always, always, always be writing down the interesting things that happen in your life. Dialogue, really important, sometimes hard to do. Pay attention to real life conversations, and don't drag out your dialogue don't start off with, he picked up the phone and called his wife. She answered and said, hello. He said, how was your day, honey? You got to shorten that thing down. We don't want to, as readers, we don't want to know all the humdrum details of what they said to each other. We want to know the meat of their conversation. If you're going to say that, I'm going to pick up a phone and call somebody, I don't need to know how they got it in their hand. I'm going to figure as a reader, well, they picked the phone up or they dug through their purse. I'm smart enough to figure that kind of thing out. So trust your reader a little bit in your dialogue, and as you move your story along, trust your reader to be able to follow you. And with dialogue, jump right into the important parts. Hey, Matt, what? Did you know? And then you put in an important plot point. It's not, how was your day? Good. How was yours? Fine. Blah, 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 blah. At some point, you're just like, why am I reading this? So cut your dialogue down and get it to be important to the reader. Get it oh my goodness, they're going to say something. If you can have your reader with a feeling of, ooh, there's dialogue, something's going to happen, man, you have got them, and you are giving them a really good ride in that warmed up car that we talked about earlier. So let's talk a little bit about writing prompts. They can be huge, and I kind of ignored these when I was a younger writer, but I've actually had an entire series spring out of a writer's prompt. I was at a writer's group in Somerset, Kentucky, and a wonderful group of people, and the prompt for that day was the weight of the pearls in my hand. And that just, I was like, everybody's like, oh, somebody said, it was a wedding. I see a wedding. And somebody else is like, oh, it's an anniversary gift. And, all these ideas flowing. I was like, that's a theft. And, as I thought about that writing prompt, it switched in my mind to the weight of the diamonds in my hand. And an entire series grew out of that one writing prompt. So if you're at a place where you think, I don't know what to write about, I know I want to write, but what do I choose? Writing prompts can be huge. Write down your ideas for each writing prompt, and even writing some titles can really spark an entire book. Sometimes I have a book that I'm beginning to plot. I'm not ready to write it yet. I got a bunch in front of it that I have to complete, but I was reading in Proverbs, and it said, if the horses are not ready for battle, the army will fail. I'm not quoting that correctly, so I should really look that one up and memorize it. But just that little piece caught me. Ready the horses. If the horses are not ready, to turn into ready the horses. Oh my goodness. And it was like a whole book idea just downloaded from that one sentence. I cannot wait to write that book. It's going to be so exciting. So you never know where writing prompts might come from, or where you might find the inspiration for your next great story. When I'm writing, I love to listen to music. And I know that everybody's different. Some people find that very distracting. The important thing when you're writing is to be able to find a creative flow, a creative place. For me, I have kids and I have dogs and a wonderful husband and a very busy life. I'm a homeschool mom. And finding quiet time to write is difficult for me. So if we're in the car and my husband is driving, I started popping my earbuds in so that I could write, because having all these other conversations going on I just couldn't do any writing. And we do a lot of driving, a lot of traveling. So that equals a lot of writing time for me, which is awesome. So now that I've been writing with music, it really sparks my creativity. So if you have or find something that sparks your creativity, use it. And let that creativity flow. And here's some other ways that you can boost your creativity. Number one is move. As writers, that's a very sedentary thing. You can't really be getting a lot of physical exercise while writing unless you're like speaking it into a device. So you need to move. You need to exercise. The more exercise you get, the more blood flow you have to your brain, the more creative that you can be. Writing with your left hand, if it's not your dominant hand, is actually incredible for your creativity. It forces the two sides of your brain that don't usually like to communicate, and it will boost your creativity. So if you're left-handed, write with your right hand, and it'll be really funny too. It's really fun because you look like a kindergarten person writing, but that can really actually incredibly boost your creativity, not just for writing, but in all parts of your life. Art is another incredible way to boost your creativity. I was in a rather dry place creatively, and I found painting. So like this painting, they're all over my house, but I discovered painting, and I've always been an artist, and I've always drawn and really enjoyed drawing. But this type of painting is called a pour painting. And I started doing it. It was like I just couldn't stop. I was just doing painting after painting after painting because the colors were just so bright and they mixed so beautifully, and you just never really knew exactly how it was going to turn out. And then I found, like a week or two after I started painting, that I was writing in my mind. It was just coming out of me, and I had to start writing it down. So if you're in a dry place, find a different creative outlet. If you're in a place where you need to get some writing done and it's just not there, go do some form of art, whether it's crocheting, painting, sculpting clay. Go make something, because that will encourage every creative process in your life. Thanks for hanging out with me today and talking about writing. You can find my books on Amazon. I'll drop a link in the comments below. And you can also find me at my website, which is crfultonbooks.com. On my website, you can become an Inner Circle member, and you will get all kinds of sneak peeks, sales, and new book releases before anybody else. If you like this video, please subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. Have a great day. Let me try that again. Sorry.
Keep going.
I don't like that either.